So, I mean, we've got a very short session today, so I'm going to just very quickly introduce Emma. For those of you who don't know her, Emma is an NLP trainer, a member of ANLP, and her chat today, her webinar, is about her book, which is Who's Flying Your Plane? It's a brilliant book. It's really good for especially for beginners in NLP, as well as those that are more experienced. So Emma, I'm delighted to hand over to you this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. It's just so lovely to see loads of smiling faces, some fellow NLPers who've got interest in this whole subject. So thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. We were debating beforehand whether we could do a show of hands of who's new to NLP and who has done some NLP before. So if you're new to NLP, we thought that would be the easiest way. Just raise your hand. Yeah, we've got, okay, great stuff. Jeanette, thank you. Wonderful. Yeah, getting a few show of hands. Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you. Anu, that's Lima. Brilliant. Wonderful. Okay. So for everybody else, you will get something too, because as Shannon and myself were talking beforehand, there's always something, a different angle of something that I'm hoping that you'll get from today's session. Those who are new, wow, we've got a bit of an adventure for you today. So I'm really excited to be sharing some tools with you to help you to have a different perspective. Normally I use flip charts, but I've gone for traditional slides today. So I will be sharing my screen with you. And if you have any questions, there's going to be a great opportunity at the end to ask me anything, obviously relevant rather than where do I shop, around the topic today. So let me start sharing my screen and we'll get started. Okay, here we go. Righty ho, can you guys see that okay? All good? Excellent. So it's all about today, taking back the controls of your life. So I love this analogy around our lives being like a flight. Okay, so imagine that you are a pilot of your own life, and sometimes it can feel like somebody else is running the show. So what we're going to talk about today is firstly how to stop that autopilot, you know, when things happen automatically. So again, for those who are already NLPers, I'm going to share with you some of the tools that I would use with clients, and we're going to go through some of those so that you can have a refresh on those. And those that are new, we're going to give you some takeaways for you to look at life in a slightly different way. So we're going to learn about how to disengage your autopilot. Why is that important? Well, if you're on autopilot, a number of things can happen. If you're on autopilot, one of the things that can happen is you can miss the view because you're concentrating on something else. You're not actually looking out the window where you're going. So there may be opportunities that you miss if you're on autopilot, but also there may be things that, you know, like storms that are coming up, that if you're not actually looking and taking a view, that's you can miss things. So setting direction, we're going to talk about that again today. There's this, if you've ever been on a plane, just a little bit of news for you, 98% of the time you are off course. Reason being, there's no roads up in the sky, and you're always adjusting to make sure you're on course. So having that flexibility to make sure that you are heading the direction that you want to go. So apparently I'm in Essex, sunny old Essex, and if I wanted to head to Edinburgh, I only need to be a couple of degrees off and I'll end up in Norway instead. So this whole idea of making sure that we're on track. Then once we've actually learned about the autopilot, so I'm going to talk about that, we're then going to talk about how you can take back control of your life, because if you haven't got those controls, then it can feel a bit overwhelming sometimes. It can feel frustrating. It can feel like somebody else is running the show. So we're going to talk about that. That picture, that is of me flying. I had a flying lesson a year or so ago, and the pilot who was teaching me, what he said was, when you're flying a plane, only one person at any one time can be in control. Otherwise, it gets messy. Okay. So this whole idea of being able to absolutely be in the driving seat or the pilot seat of your life. So I'm going to go through the communication model, because this is, if we press pause on our autopilot, the whole idea of the communication model, we're going to understand how we create this autopilot, how we create these automatic responses. Some of them are helpful, great, we keep them. Others are less than helpful. And if we know to start with how we've created that, then we can know how to make change. Because NLP is, as you know, all about choice and all about being able to make change. So we will go through this just quickly, just as a refresh. So what happens is an external event occurs, okay? And that can be anything from, I don't know, somebody cutting you off on the road to a phone call. It could be anything. But they reckon that we take in about 2 million bits of information at any one time through our 5 senses. So what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, and what we feel. So what we're doing is basically taking all of this information at any one time. Is that all right? Can we mute? Is that okay? Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're taking all of that information, and we've got 2 million bits of information that we're being bombarded with. Now, cognitive load theory, for those people who like the research behind this, cognitive load theory says that we can only process 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information at any one time. So 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information. So what that means is we basically have to go through some filters to get it from 2 million to this 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. So that's why, if you've ever been to the bar, imagine that we're actually in a live conference right now. My turn to get the drinks. I rack up to the bar, and Karen, you're good. I know you want a G&T. Cash, I've got you a pint. Shannon, you got a glass of wine. But by the time I get to Tammy or Helen, I'm like, oh, what was it that they wanted? Can't quite remember. So how do we get from this 2 million to these smaller chunks of information? Well, we have 3 filters. We have distortion, we have deletion, and we have generalization. Those are the 3 filters that we have that's going on at any one time. So let's talk about what they are. The first one, let's talk about generalization. So generalization, another word for generalization, is beliefs. Okay, so it's our beliefs that we have that actually are like a lens through which we see the world. And we create them, as you probably are aware, from many, many years back when we were little. They reckon, Piaget, in terms of psychology, reckons that by the age of 7, we have created our main values and beliefs. Okay, so let's give you an example of how these are created. If you've ever had little ones or been involved with bringing up little ones, you basically, you're at home maybe, and you show them a picture of a cat and you say, this is a cat. And they like, cat. And you're like, my child is a genius. They know it's a cat. And then you go to the park and there's dogs. And these dogs have 4 legs. They're fluffy. They've got tails. They've got heads. And they look very similar to a cat. And your child points to the dog and says, cat. And you're like, no, that's a dog. And this goes on for a little while, doesn't it? Until you know that a cat is a cat and a dog is a dog. And so what happens is we extrapolate one thing, it's a one of those. Yeah, so we can have some useful ones around dogs and cats and chairs. I mean, the chair you're sitting on right now, you didn't have to walk in the room today and go, oh, what is that 4-legged thing? What is that? What does that do? You knew that it was. So it really helps us in terms of that short cut to knowing, it's a one of those, okay? So some of those are helpful and some maybe less so. Then we have distortion and deletion. So we've got the main generalization, but a distortion might be, give you an example, these big Indian elephants, when they were little, it used to be that they would be tied to a stake in the ground. And if they moved away, they would be hit. And that would happen over and over until they learned not to run away. So you can get the biggest Indian elephant, tie it to the flimsiest stake in the ground, and it won't run away because it's a learned behavior. It's a distortion of reality. Okay, so that's a distortion. And then deletion. So deletion is where, to stop us having overwhelm, that we actually delete information. Okay, so that we reduce it down. So an example of that could be if you're walking down the street, for example, and you afterwards somebody messages you, a friend, and says, "Oh, I saw you, but you didn't see me." Yeah, or maybe you've lost your keys. If you're anything like me, you hunt high and low, you go back to where you first started and there they were because you didn't see them. You've deleted information. I used to work in the insurance world and there was all sorts of deletions on claims, all sorts of things that were deleted. So what's interesting around this deletion, distortion, and generalization is it works as a dynamic model. Because if you have a belief and a strong belief, whether it's useful or not, what happens is we delete and distort information to keep that generalization, that belief alive. Give you an example, couples therapy. There was a lady and a guy in couples therapy, and he said, "Oh, you know, she never says anything nice about me." So that was the belief. She never says anything nice about me. So they carry on the therapy session, and partway through, she says, "Well, what I really appreciate about him is X, Y, Z." And so the people that were running it says, "Okay, hang on a second. Did you hear what she just said?" And the guy was like, "No." So can you see? Deletion. First line of defense, deletion. Didn't even hear it. I said, "Okay, can you say it again?" I said, "Well, yeah. What I really like about him is when he does X, Y, Z." Yeah. And guess what the response was? The guy went, "Oh, she's only saying it because you're here." So can you see how the distortion then comes in to keep that belief, that generalization alive? Now, if it's a helpful belief, great. But if it's not so helpful, then that can become a bit of an issue. So how do we form these? We form these beliefs through our values, through attitudes, meta programs, decisions, memories, language, time, space, basically our experience. And this is where we create, this is how we create our map of the world. This is how we create our version of reality. And our version of reality will be different. Mine will be different to yours, even if we've had exactly the same experience, because of different experiences we've had previously, because of our attitudes or our meta programs. That's why everybody's map of the world is different. So we've got these 2 million pieces of information gone through our filters down to the 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information. Then it goes through this internal representation. This is where we create meaning. So we interpret what's happening and go, "Ah, it's a one of those." We do that transderivational search. And this, again, speed of light. We're not doing it consciously. Speed of light moment that actually it's going, "Ah, what's that like? Oh, it's similar to that." Yeah. And that's how we then create meaning, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, what's going on for us, which then drives how we feel, our state, how we're feeling, which also impacts on our physiology. And that's why if you're a morning person and something happens in the morning, you'll feel much better about it than if it's late at night. Yeah, so your physiology impacts your state and the meaning impacts your state. Okay, that then drives your behavior, what you say and what you do. And what's interesting is that's the bit that the rest of the world see. We just see the behavior. We don't see or everything else that's going on. That whole autopilot, speed of light stuff, you don't see it. All you see is the behavior. And what's interesting is we tend to try to judge people by their behaviors, but we tend to judge ourselves by our intention. And this model is about stopping that and going, actually, I want to be curious, wonder what's going on for that person. I wonder what's happened previously, what belief was going on, what meaning they've attached to it, and maybe what they were feeling, what was happening for them that created that behavior. Because we have a presupposition in NLP, as you guys know, of every behavior is motivated by a positive intention. So there's a need or some positive intention that that behavior is trying to meet, trying to fulfill. So that could be love or certainty, or it could be self-assurance, it could be security, it could be all of these high-level needs that that behavior is trying to meet. And then after that, you get the outcome. All right, so speed of light, event happens. So let's take an event of you've been cut up on the street. Your belief, your filter might be, or your generalization, he was a ignorant driver, or whatever it might be. The meaning is that, well, they have been rude, they've not been polite. You may feel angry around that. And then the behavior, somebody goes straight onto their horn. Yeah, so pressing their horn, outcome, they don't feel great about the whole situation. Yeah, there might be fisticuffs, shall we say, at dawn. So there may be an altercation. Okay, change the belief, and that changes the chain reaction. Okay, so let me give you another example. I was driving home from work about 26 years ago now, and I happened to not stop quite in time and hit this other car. Now, I had a distortion going on at that moment because my brother had had a car accident only a couple of weeks before, and somebody had run into my dad as well. And so my distortion was, oh, well, it was my time. So it's just one of those things. The meaning was, oh, okay, well, you know, it's just one of those things. I didn't get angry, so my state was calm and relaxed. My behavior, well, I had a conversation with the person that I hit. The outcome, that's how I met my husband, in a car accident. So the whole idea of this, all of the part that in the head, that part there, that's your response. And that's the bit that you're in control of and that you can change and have choice over. So the same event, the car accident could have happened. However, if I had a different belief, or if he had had a different belief that had generated that meaning of, oh, a reckless driver, the state of anger, behavior of arguments, then the outcome may have been very different. So this whole model, yes, we use it for communication, absolutely, so that we can understand a bit more about why people are responding the way they do. And in NLP, as you know, it's all about curiosity rather than judgment. But it also helps us to press pause on our autopilot and to know, actually, when things aren't going the way we want them to go, if something's not happening how you expected it or how you wanted it, then we can make changes. And by making changes to those elements, helps us to be back in control of our lives. So shorthand, for people like shorthand, event plus response equals outcome. And the great news is that even if the events are outside our control, the R part, the response, absolutely is within our gift to make change. So Viktor Frankl, if anyone's ever read his book, Man's Search of Meaning, he's an incredible guy. He was in the war, he was tortured, his family were tortured and murdered, he was starved. But he said there's a gap between all this that they're doing and my response. And that gap and that choice, that is something that nobody can take away from me. That is within my remit. And so this is the bit that really can stop that autopilot and help you to get back into that flying seat of your life. It enables you to make choice. And NLP, like we say, is all about choice. So what do we want instead? Okay, how do we want to respond? So again, we've got the little bits at the bottom: event, then your thoughts and beliefs, the meaning, which is your interpretation, how you feel, and your behavior, what you say and what you do, remembering the positive intention, and the outcome. So what can you do to take back those control? Well, the first thing, set your outcome, set your direction. What do you want? I'm sure you're familiar with this whole idea of well-formed outcome. I use Julia Hayes' model, the posied model. I don't know whether you've come across it, but this is one that I absolutely love. So positively stated, state what you want rather than what you don't want. Okay. If you remember the neurological pathways in your brain, so basically, what happens is if you say, don't look down, your brain has to process look down before it works out what not looking down is. That makes sense? So it doesn't process negation. So you need to say what you want rather than what you don't want, because otherwise the don't want pathways will fire before the want pathways fire. All right. So just think about what you want. And this again, is it owned by you? This really is important in terms of popping you back in that pilot seat of your life, not somebody else's. So I had somebody once who came working with me, and she had this beautiful thing that she wanted her children to be happy. Beautiful aspiration. But it wasn't a well-formed outcome because, as you know from the model I've just talked about, there's no way that you can actually go into somebody's brain and make them happy. I can change me. I can't necessarily change other people. So what we worked with is to help her to become the best parent that she could be, because that was owned by her and that was within control. Okay. So again, getting yourself strapped into your pilot seat, you need to make sure that it's owned by you. And then the sensory base. So what are you going to see? What are you going to feel? What are you going to hear when you actually have achieved that? Making sure that positive intention, the outcome, is what you want. And then checking the consequences of the outcome, the ecology. Yeah. What are you going to gain? What are you going to lose? And being able to actually really think about what this outcome is going to give you. Okay. Is it desired? Do you really want it? And is it, I know you're determined to get it. So those are just some things to think about so that you've actually set your direction, set your outcome, helps you to be in that driving seat. So then you can start to think about, okay, so if I know where I'm going, what events do I need to create so that I can get to that outcome? So what do I need to do to get there? And once you've created these events, what can happen is you can then use your sensory acuity and your behavioral flexibility to check you're on track. Yeah, is that next step going to get me closer to where I want to go? And sometimes we have to do sideways steps before moving forward. That's absolutely fine. But having that flexibility, again, presupposition of NLP, the element in the system with the most flexibility is the catalyst of the system. So what that means is that they have the most influence and the most power within the system if you have that flexibility. So you've done your outcome. You've also created your events. So what about those unexpected events? What about those things, the storms that come that actually maybe you didn't notice on? We have these things, don't we? Curveballs that turn up every now and again. So this whole idea again of choice with NLP, you can learn, and that's the joy of it, you can learn to change your beliefs, how you interpret those events, how you manage your emotions, and how you change your behaviors. NLP is so beautiful that it gives you all of those tools to do all of those things. And this whole idea of changing the response will change your outcome and enable you to take back the controls of your life. So whether those events are external, so that could be like people pressing buttons or curveballs or issues coming in terms of life, but also can be internal events such as self-sabotage. Yeah. So all of the things that are occurring, we can absolutely start to learn how to have choice over them. So let's talk now about managing the R, managing your response. Okay. So we know how autopilot has been created. We know that actually we have choice, but how do we do it? How do we change our response? So the first thing is to realize this whole idea of whether we're going to be living at cause or living at effect. Okay. So for the people that are living at cause, it's not what happens to them that they know that's not important. It's what they do about it. Yeah. So this whole idea, if you're living at cause, instead of going, why me? You go, what can I do about it? How can I move this forward? How can I make this work? What can I do to take responsibility? So what they're doing is taking that responsibility and ownership and going, no, it's my plane. I'm in that pilot seat. I'm the one that's flying this. Those people that are in effect, living at effect, that's a very different response. That's the why me response. Yeah. Why has that happened to me? It's not fair. And what happens here, there's been some research called psychoneuroimmunology. Don't know whether you've heard of it. Psychoneuroimmunology, what they've looked at is our thoughts, what we think, basically has an impact on us physically, and that also has an impact on our immune system. So what we're thinking, when we then check in with our body, the body is reflecting our thoughts and impacting on our immune system. And what happens is when people are living at effect, they're giving away their power. So they're giving away their power to other people rather than taking accountability. Now, it could be other people, but it also can be organizations. So when people have turned around and said, oh, you know, the organization has made me ill, for example, yeah, they're giving away their power to something or somebody else rather than being in the driving seat and, you know, taking accountability. So how do we know where we're living? Well, just eavesdrop on ourselves is one of the ways. Yeah, listen to what we say. Are we saying, it's not fair? Are we saying, you know, this has happened to me? Or are we saying, okay, what do we need to do differently? So the great news is the more you start to think about it in this way, the more those more positive and useful neurological pathways can be formed, and the wider they become. So these external events, I thought I'd take an example, one that I hope resonates with you. I'm sure at some point it may do. This idea is somebody pressing your buttons, yeah? So it's like somebody leaning over and pressing, you know, hopefully not the eject button, but at least some of your buttons. And I work with lots of clients who have this, and they say, you know, oh, they just know how to wind me up. They just know how to make me angry. You notice that language, how to make me angry. So again, giving away their power and allowing other people to press those buttons. So I love that whole idea of, if you don't want somebody to press your buttons, don't leave your control panel open, right? Shut the lid on it. And there's ways in terms of NLP so that they can press the buttons and nothing happens. So they can press away all they like, but nothing happens. So some of the things to think about, to give yourself some space. So before you react, give yourself a little bit of space. First thing is realizing that rarely are they doing it deliberately. Yeah, people think, oh, you know, they're doing it deliberately, they're being mean. That's not normally what's happening, because, as you know, people are not their behaviors. Okay, so another presupposition of NLP. People are not their behaviors. We are so much more than that. Behaviors are just the thing that we see, but actually remembering there's a positive intention behind both their response and the reaction. Okay, so there's that positive intention behind both how you're responding and also the other person's reaction. The other thing I love to do is, what else could this mean? So let's take the example of somebody cutting you up on the road. Okay, take that as an example. What else could it mean? If you're interpreting it, yeah, they're being rude, they're ignorant, then that leaves you, you know, not many places to go, okay, apart from feeling annoyed if you're anything like me. But if you think about what else it could mean, how does it feel different if you thought that they were rushing to hospital to see a loved one? Does that shift how that meaning is for you? Does that feel different? So what we're going to do now is just take a few moments. I want you to think about a time where something's happened to you, where someone has pressed your buttons, not literally, obviously, that metaphor of maybe, you know, riled you in some way, shape or form, made you a little bit annoyed or a little bit angry, or maybe a situation that you've interpreted in a way that you thought, oh, oh, they're being really rude or whatever it might be, and think, what else could this mean? Yeah. So just take a minute or two just to have a think about that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see your beautiful faces and just have a couple of minutes just to think about a situation. Because the whole idea around this is to think about something that actually is going to give you a better outcome. So it's going to help you to feel better about it. Because you know what? Whether you think that person has been rude or ignorant, or whether you think, oh, maybe they're rushing to help somebody, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to know because they're gone. Yeah. Unless you can ask them what their intention is. Yeah. We're making it up. And I love this phrase that we have in NLP. If you're going to make something up, you might as well make up something positive, right? So you might as well make up something positive because the impact that that will have on you will be more positive and the outcome will be better. Cool. So if anyone wants to share anything, feel free to pop it in chat or ask any questions at this point. But this is just a beautiful thing to think of a different way. What else could that mean? Just opening our perspective, our map of the world, stretching that a little bit more. Beautiful. All got something? Yeah. Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So the next bit is thinking about focusing on what you can control rather than what you can't control. So I do this often with clients. So I draw around my hand. Obviously, that's a very big hand, but I draw around my hands and then think about what I can control rather than what I can't control. And so I write inside all the things that I can control and then all the things that I can't control outside. The reason why this is so cool is because when we focus on what we can control, it puts us back in the driving seat. It gives us that accountability, the responsibility. And the things outside, we either do something about or let go. Because otherwise, what's happening is people getting anxious, overwhelmed, worried about all of those things that are sitting on the outside of the hand that basically we can't do anything about. Whereas if we focus on the bits within the hand, that then puts us again in the driving seat and it's okay, well, I can do something about this. And so some of the things that you might have is like what you eat. It can be small things. This helped loads within COVID. For those of you who obviously we've all experienced our own version of what happened in terms of COVID. But there was a lot of people, a lot of my clients were feeling very overwhelmed. So this is great if you're a practitioner that you can work with your clients so that, okay, in that time, what can you focus on? You could focus on going for a walk or what you ate, what time you got up, what exercise you did. All of those things are within your remit, and it can, rather than feeling overwhelmed, it puts you back in that control. Yeah, puts you back in that driving seat. So again, take a moment to draw a hand on a piece of paper, and then think of a situation that maybe you're finding less than easy right now. And then think about what it is that you can control and write some bits within that hand. And those bits that are outside, you either let go or think about what you can do to change those. Okay. Good stuff. So before we move on, are there any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? Is it all making sense? Yeah? Excellent. I've got some nods. I love it. Yes, thank you. Good stuff. Love the hand exercise. Yeah, I find that really useful. And for those of you, if you've got kids, it's a great one to use with children. It really is. It's a really good one to use with children. And we're all kids, really, aren't we? Let's be honest. We just might be a bit taller. Or some of us might be a bit taller. For those of you who obviously haven't met me in person, I'm not the tallest person in the world. So hence why I'm the size of a child. Okay, cool. All right, amazing. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen again. And then let's now talk about how we can start using this beautiful communication model as a tool for change. Okay, so I use this communication model as a framework to enable me to work with coaching clients. Okay, so we've talked about obviously the well-formed outcome. So and the POSIT models, so making sure that that they where they want to go and what that looks like, and the ecology and all of that bit. We've talked about creating events to generate that, but then the bits that the change work I see sits within this beliefs work, the deletion, distortion, and generalization, the internal representation. And I like to hook NLP tools to this model. So I am hoping this will be really helpful for you guys who work with clients. So let's think about, obviously, generalizations, as we talked about, another word for beliefs. Okay, so I tend to do a lot of work using timeline, for example, or submodality changes to do some work on those beliefs to change those. And then I want to talk about what's generated those beliefs, and that beliefs and values, as we know, tend to go hand in hand. So a value is what's important to a person. So again, you probably already know that. Now, what can happen is when people, like the pressing of buttons that we were talking about, those hot buttons, it can be a clash of values, absolutely. So if it is a clash of values between two people, it's that hierarchy, yeah? But actually, sometimes what it is, it's not just a clash of values, it's the criteria or the rules around the value that's become the issue. So two people could have a value of money, but the rules, what has to happen for that value to be met, can be the bits that are completely different and could be at odds. So what can happen if, for example, you have a value of family? So family, for one person, what has to happen for that value to be met could be very different to another person. Yeah, or bringing up your children. Yeah. So let me give you an example of sometimes where those criteria can go awry. And again, this is another. So I keep this in the back of my mind whenever I'm working with somebody who comes in and says that they're suffering from anxiety or anger, or, that person, the relationship issues. This is a really good one to look at. So I was working with somebody once who had this beautiful value of love within a relationship. Great value. Absolutely super, wonderful. However, the value, the actual criteria, the rules for her to experience that value of love, that was the bit that was going wrong. Because when we looked at it, her rules were he had to constantly contact her, text her on a regular basis. He wasn't able to, in her world, wasn't allowed to go out with anybody, like his friends or anything, had to be constantly reassuring her. And when we investigate a little bit further, how often did she feel that value of love? Well, she didn't. The reason why she didn't was because it was all outside her control. So remembering, focusing on what we can control rather than what we can't control. Everything was about needing him to do something for her to feel a particular way. Yeah. So what we did is we kept the same value, but we worked with her rules and criteria to change those so that she had that value of love met more often. So every time she thought about her partner, she felt love. Or when she saw a picture of him, she felt love. Or actually, we even created some things for her to feel love without being dependent on him at all. So when she looked after herself, she felt love. So can you see how, again, having a look and knowing all of this in your back of your mind, is it a values issue? And if it is it a top level value, or is it the criteria that sits behind it? Meta programs, you know, there's lots and lots, over 70 meta programs, but the one again around this being in your pilot seat and being able to fly your own plane is where your locus of control is. Is it internal or external? So what that means is, how do you know whether you've done a good job? Is it an internal check or is it an external check? If people are completely dependent on external feedback, then if people like what you do, they feel great and you're on a high. And if they don't, then that can be less than helpful, right? So helping that meta program and shifting that so that they have more of an internal check first with an external check afterwards. Does that make sense? So there might be some work there to change that on Timeline and many other tools to change those meta programs if that's not working. Then you've got attitudes. I love this whole idea of attitudes. So whether we have an attitude of gratitude, for example, whether we're thinking about abundance and positivity, or whether it's looking at lack, that can also have a big impact. I talk about it in the book. I talk about whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, and an optimist journey and a pessimist journey. So let's talk about, like, we're talking events happen in life. So if we talk about a pessimist journey, when they're having a high, they're in a good state, they say, oh, it's not going to last. It's not going to last. And they don't actually enjoy that positive, good state. And then they go into the trough, you know, like a trough of life. And they wallow in that trophy bit for a long time, going, oh, I told you that would happen. And they sit there for a long time. And then when they start to go back out, it's like, oh, yes, but it won't last. It won't last. And then down they go again. Okay. So that is the pessimist. An optimist might have exactly the same events, exactly the same pattern, but when they are up at the high, it's like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm having the best time. And then when they're in the troughs, what happens in the troughs is they go, it's okay. It won't last. We'll get through it. And then so they're in the troughs less time and they're in the highs for longer. So they have exactly the same events, but the attitude makes a difference. So again, it's a continuum, right? There's a continuum in terms of this, where you're at. And sometimes you may find it easier than others being an optimist rather than a pessimist. But actually having that at the back of your mind can really help as well. So memories, obviously, we work a lot in terms of memories, in terms of timeline and healing those, you know, so that your past doesn't have to dictate your future. So it just gives you some of the tools that I would use if somebody's, you know, wanting some help in that way. Then we've got the internal representation. So that's, as we talked about, the transderivational search. And that is all about submodality work. Yeah. So having that ability to change the interpretation, reframing the question that I asked, what else could that mean? What else could that mean? What else could that mean? Reframing and looking at that in a different way. And then we've got states. Okay, so anchoring is where we obviously create new neurological pathways. So if you imagine your brain as a jungle with many, many, many neurons, what we do the first time we do something, it's like going through that neurological pathway, with a machete through a jungle. Okay, the more often you do it, the wider that path becomes. And you can create new neurological pathways, as you know, with NLP. So if somebody's pressing your buttons, yeah, you can rewire. So if somebody presses my doorbell, instead of my doorbell ringing, it could flick the kettle on, quite like that, as a different option. Does that make sense? So rather than the pathway of anger or irritation, you could create a new pathway of calmness or resourcefulness. Okay, so if the state isn't working for you, you can collapse anchors, yeah, or create a circle of excellence or some beautiful states for that person that they could use going forward. And then obviously there's behavior. And whenever we change behaviors, obviously we keep that positive intention and make sure that the new behavior is absolutely going to meet the positive intention of that old behavior. Okay, so you could swish, you could use swish, you could use new behavior generator. And as I say, you've obviously got the well-formed outcome. So I just wanted to, use this as a bit of a tool. Depending on what the client's coming in with, you can then look at where to start. So I love the analogy, and it's one of Connie Ray Andreas's, is where do you start with somebody? If you think about knots on a shoelace, if you've got multiple knots on your shoelaces, you have to undo the top one. Okay, so yes, in theory, if we start at beliefs, it will filter all the way down. However, if the top one is an unwanted emotion, you might want to unpick that one first, because then you can get to the beliefs as you go further down. Okay, so even though you could say, oh, this is the way to do it, yeah, in an ideal world, but you know what, every client's different, every person's different. So having this flexibility to go, actually, I've got that sort of pattern in the back of my mind so that I can cover all of those areas. So I hope that's helpful, just to give you, a little bit of an insight of what I use it for. So in conclusion, you can't always control what happens to you. However, you do always have a choice as to how you respond. And that is the key to getting back into that driving seat of your life, being able to be more present, being able to steer your plane the way you want to, in the direction that you want. It is all about being able to have that at your fingertips. And that's what NLP has done for me anyway. That's what it's given me. And I hope that it's given you some ideas today. So questions and also a bit of reflection. So just for some of you who are really experienced, I hope there's been something there that you've gone, oh, that's an interesting one, or that's a new thing that I might want to look at. For those of you who are new to NLP, again, I hope there's been some things that you can take away that's been, just a little few nuggets to think about, even if it's just like, oh, that's interesting when that's going on with that person. That's their reality. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just a different perspective. So going to ask, stop sharing the screen, answer any questions, and then give you a little bit of time to think about what you've learned today and what you'll do differently as a result. So let me stop sharing my screen for the last 10 minutes or so. So feel free to put anything in chat. I think that's probably the easiest way, isn't it, Karen and Cash, for questions in chat. I coach and teach people to learn to drive. This is something maybe used for students. External parts and challenging limiting beliefs. Lovely. Thank you, Chris. Great stuff. Amazing. Yeah, wonderful.
We have a question from Andrea.
Perfect.
How exactly can I change anything after someone hits my button? How exactly?
How exactly? Okay, yeah, great question. Okay. So the first thing is to understand what it is that's caused you to feel that way. Okay, so what is it? Is it a clash of values? Is it something that's important to you? What's happened that's enabled you, that's made you react in that way? Is the person that asked the question available, so I can just have a quick chat if they wanted to? Is that possible, Cash, to unmute them and spotlight them?
I'm here, but my connection is very bad, so I cannot turn on camera. Sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah, no worries, honey. So have you got an example? Because I find that when we talk about examples, that can really bring it to life. Have you got an example for me, honey?
Actually, I don't have. I was curious about your experience. I don't have an example, sorry.
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. So basically what I would do if somebody's finding that somebody said something and you've reacted in that way is taking the time when you're outside of that to work with the coach to resolve that. So what I would do is I would firstly collapse out the anchor. Okay, so you've had an automatic response of somebody said something and immediately you've reacted. Yeah, what we can do with NLP is get rid of that automatic response and create a different response. Okay, so basically, the jungle thing, growing over that old pathway and creating a different one. I would then do some work on the belief around it. let me give you an example. I had somebody who felt that they were always being controlled, that people were trying to control them. And we did a beautiful reframe on that of actually people only try and control people who are already in control. Okay, so this was one actually for me that resonated hugely, because then when people tried to control me, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I must be already in control. And it was like water off a duck's back. It made no difference to me at all. And I felt resourceful. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Just a different perspective. So I would first of all collapse out the emotional reaction. I would then look at the belief that was sitting behind that and maybe help with reframing or changing that belief. And then I would do a new behavior generator or something like that to install that new behavior so that when they press the buttons again, nothing happens. And you go, wow, that's curious. That's interesting. Thanks so much. That worked. Does that make sense? So that's what I would do. So for those of you who are new to NLP, coaches and any NLP professional that's been trained would be able to help you to do that. And you can learn how to. And I'm going to plug it. I'm sorry. I've given you it in the book. I haven't got time to go through it all now, but if you have a read in the book, I talk about how to do a lot of those processes as well. So, but find yourself a coach to work through that. If that's
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Does that answer it? Is that okay, honey?
We have another question from Caroline. Caroline, I'm going to spotlight you if that's all right, so you can ask your question on screen.
Yeah, I think it may have been similar to the question that you just had, but I guess the additional component I feel for me around this usually happens with the clients if they do something and if they violate a really strong core value of mine. I work a lot on the sort of overly emotional, I tone down the overly emotional response, but it can linger for weeks and months. And I think, is that just a question of trying to reframe it and do the new behavior generator over and over again? Is it just a matter of persisting, would you say? Or are there other NLP tools that can help with that kind of that's stubborn, you know what I mean, like that stubborn going, oh, that was a really unfair thing they did to me, and that's, do you know what I mean, when it hits a core value,
yeah, absolutely. So what I would look at is what's the belief that you have that sits behind what's going on. So if you chunk and take yourself sort of up and out and have a look at what's going on, and then go, okay, so what is it that's driving that feeling that you've got? So it can be a value. So it can be a value around being polite or being professional, whatever it might be. If it's a value, have a look at the rule and then change using timeline the rule so that you can shift that. So if the rule is around, have you got an example? Again, it's easier with an example.
Oh, I had a client that I've been, with for years, and she just canceled our sessions just like that without giving any reason, and she just refused all contact with me. And it's just so weird. It's never happened before. And I think there was a lot around, self-doubt, but also fear. Like, why can't she just give me a reason? Like, I'm actually quite a reasonable person. I just don't like it when someone who I'm supposed to, I'm helping, and she had been very happy for years. And I think, so I think it stuck with me because I couldn't figure out the why. And therefore, even though it was completely outside of my control, well, at least as far as I know, if she had told me if there was a problem, I could have worked on it, but I didn't really know what the problem was. So I think that's why it's lingered a bit, because it's kind of, and I don't want instances like that to eat away at my self-worth or, I guess I want to use NLP on myself to really work through things like that.
Yes. What I would do what I would do is change that rule around the value. Okay, so she's violated your value, but it's because the rule is outside of your remit. So if you create a rule of like, maybe it's like, I have done everything that I can within my power to help that person, rather than they haven't done something for me, then you can do some timeline work to change that belief and to change that rule, so that then if it ever happens again, it's okay, and you have peace in your mind and
Have
you've healed
peace,
that
yeah.
from it. Absolutely. The other thing I use lots and lots and lots is core transformation. If you've ever done core transformation, there's a part of you that feels that way. So that again can really, really help. But yeah, it's worth spending some time just understanding what's happened and then doing some work on that so that it, yeah, unfortunately, one of my trainers once said to me, you know, I've tried to change people and I spent all my life trying to work on the people around me. And then once I've changed them, tried to, a whole nother raft of people come. And that's the thing, we can't change these other people. We can't change how they act and behave, which then obviously puts us in that whole, like, when they're nice, you feel up, when they're not so nice, you feel down. You don't know what's gone on with that person.
No, as in, like, I just want to work on my response.
Absolutely.
And the fact that I'm still triggered and the fact that I'm still holding on, like, I just want to learn. I know I can't change them or control them. I just want to sort of improve my response. And it feels so silly sometimes when you do this line of work, but then I'm being immensely triggered and having, you know, and really needing NLP on myself to overcome this.
You know what? You're not alone, honey. The way I was only saying yesterday to Karen on a call that NLP, when you do it on yourself, it's a bit like cutting your fringe. You can cut your fringe, okay, but to try and do the bits at the back, less than easy. And actually, that's where you need the coach for yourself as well. You know, the people that are really successful are the people that go, actually, like you've done, this isn't working for me. This is something that I need, you know, to work on, either myself or with other people. You know, that shows this beautiful level of maturity and understanding, and you know, hats off to you, honey, because
but I can admit that here, right? And this is a safe space. I can admit that here. I wouldn't admit that elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, absolutely, you're in a safe space, but very much about using those tools to help you. So hopefully, has that given you something? That's what I would do. Look at your values, collapse out that anchor, change your value rules so that they're more effective for you. That's what I would do going forward.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And happy to help. So, you know, anybody, feel free to contact me. You know, I'm more than happy to chat and help with people. So yeah, amazing. Cool. So we've got a couple of minutes. Over to you, Karen, I'm guessing. Oh, I can't hear you, darling.
That age-old Zoom problem. Remember to unmute.
Unmute. It wouldn't be a Zoom call if you didn't have that, though, right?
Exactly. So, well, I mean, I think it's wonderful. Thank you for reminding us of the communication model and giving us some different insights to the communication model. Certainly, I'd never considered it before in terms of certainly understanding the values, the buttons. I think I recognize when my buttons have been pushed and it links to values. And I'd never really thought about the criteria, the rules that sit underneath that. So thank you for that amazing insight. And I'm sure, you know, reading the comments, there's so many people who have been given new insights, and it is a favorite model of the NLP community, and it's wonderful to hear it explained again in a different way, in a slightly different way, and just to act as a reminder for new people and a reminder for those of us who have been in the NLP community for a little while. It's really important to receive those reminders. So thank you so much, Emma, for such an enlightening session. Really appreciate it. As Emma said, you can contact her. This recording will be going up on the ANLP website and will be linked to Emma's profile as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. Thank you, Emma, for giving us an amazing insight into the communication model. And we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. I ought to actually mention Emma is presenting at the NLP conference as well on a new model that you that I've had the privilege of experiencing in one of your practice groups. That again is well worth a visit. And I have my little hand for future.
I love it.
I will be pinning them up all over the house.
Amazing. I love it. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about stress. at the conference. So a model that you can use for yourself, but also with clients. So yeah, the title is Managing the 3 L's Out of Stress. So yes, so if you wanted to come and have a listen, that would be amazing. So yeah, amazing. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Cash and Shannon, for putting on these webinars. Really appreciate it. And for each and every one of you for being here today. Really appreciate it. If I didn't get a chance to talk and answer your questions, then just message me. You can contact me on my website, which is achieveyourgreatness.co.uk, or via the profile on ANLP. So thank you so much. Cheers.